He-Man gets ahead in the line. Here's your look at the new Mattel Masters of the Universe Origins He-Man version 2. Fierce and armored for combat, He-Man is back to protect Eternia. This He-Man figure stands 5.5 inches tall and has 16 movable joints, so he's highly posable for imaginative and action-oriented fun, Masters Universe style. Longtime fans will appreciate the design of the He-Man figure's vintage-style head and full power sword. Just before getting this review started for He-Man version 2, let's get some comparisons out of the way. Being, of course, that this is a He-Man that's been re-released, let's bring in the original He-Man from the Masters of the Universe Origins line. While it seems like the bodies are identical to one another, we'll get more into comparisons of those in a second. You can clearly see that with He-Man version 2, they reverted back to more of a classic head sculpt. So it happens to be the same head sculpt that came included with this guy here. Here he is next to the battle armor He-Man. And of course we can also bring in Prince Adam. We've got a heaping helping of He-Man going on right now. But at least it gives you an idea that while they are using the same bodies, and for most part same color scheme, this new He-Man, somewhat new He-Man, does feature the more classic looking head sculpt, again that we got before with the battle armor release. Let's have a look at the things that come included with He-Man. Starting first, he gets himself a mini comic. While that first He-Man we had a look at on this channel was part of Wave 1, this actually was released later into the waves with the likes of Faker, with the likes of Fisto, a repaint of Evil Lyn, and LOP Merman. I didn't mention Skeletor, but Skeletor was also a version 2 release that we will be looking at upcoming here on this channel. I was sort of on the fence as to even whether I wanted to even pick up either one of these figures. Again, having already looked at the original He-Man, already looking at the original Skeletor, these are essentially just the same figures with different heads that we already received. Sort of like the equivalent of Taco Bell. Anytime they're advertising something new on the menu, you know it's not really anything new. They're just finding different ingredients to mix around. Can't believe I'm actually comparing He-Man and Skeletor to Taco Bell. Anyways, though, for this comic, unfortunately, because I did pick this up from a Canadian site, there is no dialogue whatsoever on the inside. I'm trying to think if you know what, now that I think about it, I did get some of these figures, especially like Faker. I did get him from an international source before, so I do have some of these comics kicking around that does have dialogue and actually some idea of what's going on the inside. Right now, I'm just going into this blindly. I have no idea what's happening other than the fact that the land shark is attacking Fisto. Anyways, we'll move that comic to the side. Now then He-Man comes with one other thing. Now there was two sort of checked boxes that come with this He-Man that the original He-Man didn't come included with. One of which was the fact he came with the classic head sculpt. I'll talk more about that in a second. But the other one, the tease, that little line that hooks you in, is the fact that the figure also came included with a double-sided sword. We'll have a look at the double-sided sword right now, which is essentially the same sword as what we got with Prince Adam, although here it's molded in all silver plastic. To compare it with the original He-Man sword that we did get, is this one right here. Now the only thing that's different is the fact that this one did have the guard next to the hilt. It did unfortunately sacrifice from the fact that they did want it so close to the original vintage toy that you ended up having to get Skeletor in order to combine them together. Or you only had to be able to look at He-Man from one side of the sword. As soon as you turned it around, hey, what's happened to the other half of He-Man's sword? So at least you benefited from the fact of getting this one. It looks like it's not as shiny, to be fair, as the original one that we got released, but at least to its credit, at least this time around, we actually get ourselves a double-sided sword. So we can go ahead and put that into He-Man's hand. He only has the one gripping hand to do the job of holding the sword. The other hand is just a relaxed hand. We'll put that into his hand for the time being. Figure also comes included with a battle shield. Now the shield, I'm going to grab and compare to the original shield. Seems like it's a slightly darker plastic that they've used. I wouldn't necessarily say that I fancy one over the other. Although I guess I could be fair and say I do like the darker color scheme, but it's so very close. I mean, either one would be fine. But maybe the features stand out just a little bit more with the darker plastic that they're going with. Again, other than that, the molds are exactly the same to one another, and they attach to the figure the exact same way also. Just go ahead, fit this up his forearm, and then sort of just take then the relaxed hand and fit it into the handle area there. And then you've got He-Man with his battle shield. The figure also comes included with a battle axe. Why do I feel the need to add battle in the front of everything? Somebody, I'm sure, will have to correct me down below, but I also grabbed this shield, and I can't tell whether this was with the one that was the battle armor He-Man or the original He-Man. Although, looking at the battle axe, it does bear somewhat of a striking resemblance, almost similar to the plastic that they actually did use for the power sword. So I think this is the He-Man that came with the original release. And if that is the case, then you can see there's a very drastic change between the two axes. Again, if you have the figure, please let me know down below, because a lot of times I just put these figures into baggies if I'm not planning to display them. So, again, that darker bluish gray plastic is the same that matches the shield as well. Now, if you do want to display him with the axe, go ahead and just take the sword out of his hand. And at least, like the other one that we looked at before, there is a section on the back of his torso where you can take the power sword and slide it in place. Just to also show you, slide this one out and put the other one in. There's a little bit more forgiving space, let's just say, if you want to use the original power sword. I did notice, though, especially with this one, it's a lot thicker, especially right around here. Now, that when fitting into those back, you notice that there's a little bit more resistance, and there's a lot less wiggle space to work with. And then from there, you can go ahead and take the battle axe and fit that into his hand. And there you have He-Man. Now, again, we can bring in the original He-Man. We'll move this thing, we'll move him over, and we'll bring in the original He-Man. Initially, I would have been part of that crowd, the mob that would have looked at that initial Origins He-Man and just hated the head sculpt. And I think even when I had done the review of that original He-Man, I detested that head sculpt. There was just something about it that I didn't care for. I have, though, since started liking this head sculpt a lot more. And it was also one of the reasons why in the review of Faker, I even mentioned I wish that figure could have come included with both an Origins head sculpt and a classic head sculpt, so at least you could decide for yourself which way you want to display the figure. And unfortunately, they didn't do that. Let's go ahead and pick the figures up. Just going to take the axe out of his hand. We're going to take the shield out of his hand. And we're also going to spin the figure around and slide the power sword out of his torso. Because certainly I did want to show you guys up close and personal the difference between the two figures. I mean, if you were to look at their head sculpts, it'd be hard-pressed to see any difference between the bodies, because it looks like the bodies are identical. I mean, if somebody was to say, yeah, there are differences, see if you can spot them. I wonder if my eyes would start playing tricks on me and think to myself, well, it seems almost like they've got a lighter plastic here for his skin tone than what we got right here. But I think, again, I would just be trying to look for differences between the two. At the end of the day, it seems like the loincloth, the boots are the same, the gauntlets are also the same, and it also seems like the torso armor seems to be the same between the two. The only real difference is the head sculpt from one to the other. This was the original Origins head sculpt, hated by many. That when we came to the battle armor He-Man, we actually did get this head sculpt. And I know that's not right now what we're looking at, but when we did actually get battle armor He-Man, which again, we'll just reach off to the side and bring him in so you guys can see. When we originally got this guy, we got this head sculpt here with the open mouth. But they also included with this figure, and they did the same for Skeletor too, a more classic looking head sculpt. So if you wanted to, you could take this head off the ball joint, just wiggle it off like that, and then you could replace it with the classic head sculpt. Now, a lot of times, the people that actually did pick up this figure ended up using this head sculpt for this He-Man here. And we'll quickly do a comparison between the two. One thing that is very apparent when I'm looking at the two, and I'm obviously comparing the two head sculpts, something seems off, obviously, on the eyes. And I have to say that a lot of it is probably just the figure that I ended up picking up. Clearly, the eyes are a little bit more aligned, I think, to the mold on the one that I did get with the Battle Armor He-Man. It does seem like they're using the same head sculpts, though. But something is seriously off on the eyes on this one. They're lopsided. I don't want to say that they're like Shannon Doherty's eyes, but they seem to be wandering off from where the sculpt should be. You can actually even see where the sculpting should be on the eyes, and unfortunately the eyes are just a little higher. At the end of the day, I might ultimately just do what I could have just easily done and saved myself the money of buying this in the first place. I could just pop this head sculpt off the ball joint, I could take the one that came included with Battle Armor He-Man, again, pop that off, and I could just put it back onto a He-Man body. And you got yourself a classic-looking He-Man. Again, I have to stress the idea that I'm sure it's only just my figure. Yeah, I was lucky enough to find of all the figures. Well, it was ordered and shipped to me online, so there was no way I would be able to pick out one that had a better paint job. But yeah, you can see like the eyes on this one are not quite. They're not quite there. So I guess I'm probably just going to ultimately... So really, buying this figure only really resorted in me getting a double-sided sword. And again, when you see the two side to side, the only really difference is whether you like the idea of having He-Man with a classic-looking head sculpt, or if, like me, you've just warmed up to the idea of displaying him with the Origins head sculpt in the first place. I will say, though, paint problems aside, it's actually a good-looking head sculpt if you like the classic look for He-Man. I don't feel it's as big as the original vintage toy. I feel like they shrunk the head sculpt down just a little bit, but proportionately, it works well to the body that they give you here. Now, being that this, of course, is the new He-Man Master Universe Origins figures, they do benefit from having some additional articulation. And yes, you could technically still get that classic look by just bending the knee down, and it gives them the much more crouched, familiar look. But personally, for me, I like the idea of just straightening out the legs. Speaking of the legs, though, I can't help but notice the legs on this He-Man. For what little I've had him out of the packaging, he's already developed really loose lower legs. I'm hoping that's not across the board. Because again, like they're reusing this mold again and again and again. Speaking of molds and speaking of joints, let's have a look at the articulation now on He-Man. I'm going to stick with this head sculpt because it's the cleaner of the two. The head rotates all the way around. It hinges up. It hinges down. And of course, you can get that tilt, that He-Man tilt back and forth as well. Like with all the other Master Universe figures, you can bring the arms out comfortably at a 90-degree angle bend. You can again rotate the arms all the way around. Bend at the elbow, you can rotate the forearm, and you can also rotate the hands all the way around, hinging them back and forth. These He-Man figures, or Masters figures, are only relegated to, unfortunately, a swivel in the waist, so that's all you can really do with them. You can split, yes, the legs out, you can bring the legs forward, and you can bring the legs back. And then talking again a little bit about that lower leg, unfortunately, again, on mine, just a little loose. Not dinner bell loose, but starting to develop a little bit of looseness. And the figure does have, again, articulation in the ankle, and you can also rock it back and forth as well. Just quickly looking at also the legs on the figure. Again, this is if somebody was to tell me there are 4 things on this figure that are different from the original one. It seems to me like almost like his legs are a different color, lower half of him, than the top half of him. And again, I'll just bring back the original He-Man. Maybe it's the case, I'm not sure. It almost looks like the skin coloring on his lower legs look not as yellow. Maybe there's a slight bit of, a little more of a yellow tint to the skin tone here. Again, I think I'm just going crazy. At the end of the day, I mean, really, you're only buying this figure for 2 reasons. One of which, for the fact he does have the double-sided sword. So I guess that's something. I wish still that the original He-Man figure could have come included with that power sword. Because really, at the end of the day, you're getting the same He-Man as you got before. And providing you did get yourself the body here of Battle Armor He-Man. Looks so strange and out of place. Let's go ahead and put the, you know what, let's put the original head sculpt back on. I still like the original Origins head sculpts myself. Yeah, providing you did get yourself Battle Armor He-Man. The only real reason to be getting the new He-Man version 2 is just the benefit of having a double-sided sword. Which I got to think at some point that down the road Mattel would have just simply released anyways. It does beg the question, did they bail out of the idea of doing an Origins head sculpt too soon? People weren't welcoming the idea and wanted a more classic-looking He-Man. Did they just sort of give in and say, you know what, maybe we won't do any more Origins head sculpts? But really, that isn't even fair either, because the stuff that Mattel is advertising now for upcoming He-Man figures seem to still be going with the idea of an Origins head sculpt with the longer-looking hair. I guess at the end of the day, moving this guy out of the way, it's just a matter of preference more than anything else. Do you like the look of classic-looking He-Man with the vintage-style head? Or like myself, have you warmed up to the idea of the longer-looking hair on the Origins head sculpt instead? Oh, great. Now I'm craving Taco Bell. Still, though, this He-Man version 2 is not going to be something everybody is going to be picking up. I guess, technically, if you're fine with the idea that the power sword that came with the first figure release was only single-sided, And you really could use the head sculpt that came included with Battle Armor He-Man, then you could just ultimately pass on this figure altogether. The reason why we're looking at this figure a little bit later here on this channel was I actually debated the idea of whether I actually wanted to pick these guys up or not. That's He-Man version 2 and Skeletor version 2. Skeletor is just, again, using the head sculpt that came included with the Battle Armor Skeletor. So other than just a double-sided sword, that's the only thing that makes these guys different than the version V1 He-Man and Skeletor that we've already looked at here on this channel. I feel like there are some slight color variations, like the shield and possibly even the battle axe are a different color of plastic. But again, is that enough for you to want to say, yes, I'm willing to sign on board and pick up another He-Man if you already have a He-Man from the Master Universe Origins line? It's a debatable topic. I mean, this is a nice figure also to keep in mind to keep mint on card. I've almost even considered the idea of getting another He-Man and another Skeletor for that reason, to keep them sealed so they kind of look like they're vintage figures from the 80s. Again, I don't think this is a figure that everybody is going to get on board, especially you already have the He-Man, you already have Battle Armor He-Man. But again, the sell of it, the hook line and pulling you in, is the fact he does have the double-sided or full power sword. Let me know what you guys think down below of He-Man version 2. If you already have He-Man V1, would you consider the idea of picking this guy up a second time? Or do you think that this figure should have just included the vintage head sculpt in the first place and just get rid of the concept of the He-Man Origins head sculpts? I personally like them myself. I always like reading your comments down below. And if you are new to this channel, you're enjoying all the content you're seeing, make sure you hit that subscribe button, turn on the bell notification, and please keep your peepers peeled to this channel, because we will be looking at more Masters of Universe Origins figures coming your way in the not-so-distant future. As always, guys, thanks for watching. See you guys next time.